The first beam lanced past the moon and turned night over the Pacific into noon. On every civilian camera it looked like a god had drawn a white line across the sky. To Commander Ree Park it looked like math, range gates, thermal bloom, and the time it would take for debris to start falling through breathable air if they fired back wrong. "Pharaohs is cold," said Doctor, and Tuong from the Colorado bunker. Calm voice, scuffed sneakers, a coffee ring on the edge of the console. Say the word. Ree wasn't supposed to be the one. She was a reservist air and sea officer who'd cut her teeth on hurricane evacuations and logistics nightmares, barges, bridges, borrowed buses. But Project Lantern wasn't a single silver bullet. It was 1,000 small, human things wired together until they could trick the sun. And logistics people know how to wire small things together. "Light it," she said. Between Mercury and Earth, mirrors that had spent a decade pretending to be dead satellites unfolded like lily pads in a technicolor bloom. Pharaohs took honest sunlight and did something impolite with it, tilting the corona so that the dreadnought sensors saw a false dawn, then another, then its own heat signature magnified into a phantom fleet. Naval history calls it smoke. Pharaohs called it radiometry. On the bridge of the Imperial supercarrier, the Khepri of 9 suns, the gunnery lances hesitated. Good. Hesitation was a kind of mercy. Re-switched channels. Yazzie, how's the noise? Sergeant Yazzie Benelli sat in a windowless room lined with antique radios and new physics. His grandfather had told him stories of Navajo code talkers, how metaphors could outpace machines. "We're in their headsets," he said, grin wide. "We're teaching them fishing knots and cattle brands in 3 dialects. Their automatics don't know which loop to follow. 1,000 civilian tugs, some orbital construction boats, some repurposed fuel skiffs with paint still drying, lit their green strobes. Blue Charter volunteers, sworn to the idea that defense was a civic act. Floodlights gleamed off the skeleton of the Artemis ring as crews pushed palletized shields, Whipple foam bladders, ice dust sacks into the Karman lanes. The first human trick was simple. Don't let anything lethal cross the line where a missed shot becomes a falling city. Ethics wasn't decoration. It was a constraint that made them smarter. Proportionality, discrimination, necessity, words from just war theory turned into button labels. Ree had read Marcus Aurelius in a waiting room once. The impediment to action advances action. Fine, make the impediment the atmosphere. The dreadnought fired again, late and off-axis, carving aurora over Alaska. Pharaohs rippled, bounced, whined in 18 languages as it stole photons and the enemy's attention. "They're looking in the wrong place," and said, fingers dancing. "Keep them there." Captain Mateo Alvarez of the Coast Guard, the kind of officer who could talk a cruise ship through a hurricane in a voice like warm bread, took tactical cargo ships and made them shepherd dogs. They nudged junk into place. Junk that wasn't junk. Launch fairing halves that unfolded into aerogel walls. Retired weather sats with fresh brains. Cubisats with the kind of gravitic thrusters polite science journals wouldn't print. This is how humans fight, with leftovers and stubbornness and a group chat that never sleeps. Radiation baseline climbing, and warned. They're charging something they think will scare us. "Let it scare us," Ree said, then softer. "Let it remind us." Midway had turned on a hunch and a broken code. Dunkirk had turned on the fact that a civilian could steer a boat. She broadcast a rule. No weapon fired that would shred the sky. If they had to miss an opportunity to protect a city, they would miss it. She hit send and felt the world nod. A new signature bloomed near Luna, the shape of an auxiliary ship peeling off the formation like a shark. It wasn't aiming for Earth at all. It was knifing for the far side comms lattice, the place where Lantern's mesh grew thick and brittle. If the auxiliary cut the Blue Charter's throat, Pharaoh's would falter, the shield would sag, and the next beam would write a line nobody could erase. Ree's screen filled with red. "They found the seam," Yazzie said. "Commander, we're about to have a hole where our voice should be." Ree looked at the wall of names: tug skippers, teachers riding shotgun, a nun from Manila who could fly a rendezvous like she was drawing calligraphy. She looked at the thin blue curve of air outside the bunker, the only border that mattered. "Pharaoh stays on the big one," she decided. "We take the knife with our hands." Every tug on the lunar near side burned bright. "Blue Charter," Alvarez roared on open band, "all little boats, it's time." And then the auxiliary did something no one expected. It split, shedding two spearcraft that vanished into the moon's shadow, right where the lantern mesh went blind. And Ree realized they were not the only ones who had learned to fight with leftovers. Talon was not human, but he had a human talent, holding two truths at once. The truth that the Empire had fed his people, Earth was livestock, and the truth his eyes fed him now. Earth was a neighborhood where everyone had a job. He defected years ago when a coast radio picking up his skiff told him a joke in 3 languages and offered coffee if he landed slow. Now his 4-fingered hands hovered over a console in the Colorado bunker, beside Yazzie's antique radio and N's impossible optics. The Veskai had a knack for story logic, ritual phrases that made machines believe. "Their spearcraft fly by chorus," he said. "If we give them a different song, they will fly to a different dance. Make it a song they can live through," Ree said. Day 2 of the invasion, though no one would remember days, only burns and breaths, looked like the underside of a cathedral. Pharaohs filled cislunar space with gentle lies. The auxiliary had shed spears that hunted the lantern nodes strung along Luna's far side like prayer beads. On Earth, city councils lit emergency kitchens. Kids on bikes ran fiber to shelters. A retired civil rights organizer in Atlanta set up a spreadsheet that assigned spare bedrooms to evacuees with the smooth ruthlessness of the Montgomery bus boycott logistics. Because logistics, too, can be righteous. "Blue Charter Tug 14, you are go to ram, negative." Ree corrected herself. The easiest answer was to turn spears into gravel and let gravity sort the rest. That would save the mesh and doom whatever cities the gravel threaded on its way down. She tasted the bitterness of that option, held it until it diluted. "We won't make a midway out of somebody's rooftop." Alvarez whistled low. "Copy that lantern actual, we'll herd him." Herding looked like 6 tugs shining with reaction mass burns like welders in a dark yard, slipping ahead of each spear to spit chaff that wasn't chaff. Smart dust with magnetics that whispered, "Here is the path of least resistance, the way a shepherd's dog leans." The spears, arrogant and automatic, took the bait and curved toward a corridor that bent them away from the most fragile nodes. Somewhere an engineer had designed them to avoid waste heat plumes, and humans had written a plumascript, civic hacking as air defense. "Jamming in 5, Yazzie said. The room smelled like ozone and old coffee. He and Talon laced signals, a Navajo tale about coyotes stealing fire, a Veskai harvest chant about taking only what you can carry, and embedded in both a phase pattern that would make the spear's chorus sing a half-beat late. Not destruction, indirection. The first spear stumbled, its angle changed by a degree. A degree was everything. They're learning and warned. Their supervisory loops are interrogating the lie. If they fingerprint the phase trick, we're naked. Remembered a museum pamphlet about the Battle of Midway, how the U.S. Navy confirmed the code AF meant Midway by announcing in the clear that AF is short of water. Bait as truth. Let's give them a truth to eat, she said. Broadcast that node 18 is failing heat rejection. In the clear, then actually overheat it. And blinked. We'll lose the node. We'll lose less, Ree said. Sometimes ethics isn't an answer. It's a choice you have to say out loud so you remember you made it. They cooked the node, radiators glowed. The spears swarmed. The corridor bent again, and Alvarez's tugs slid their aerogel curtains into place, catching speeds that would have killed if carried earthward and bleeding them into dull heat that the moon could eat without complaint. The first spear kissed gel, shivered, and went to sleep. The second cracked but did not shatter. Talon flinched like someone had slapped his younger self. Lantern actual, came a voice so cheerful Ree wanted to buy its soup. Captain Steve Yuta, civilian lattice operator, father of 3. We've got a problem that looks like a smiley face. Mesh telemetry is too smooth. On her display the lines were clean. Clean is bad. Real networks are messy like cities with potholes and kids chalking on sidewalks. Someone had ironed the lantern's wrinkles flat. Say it, Ree told Anne. Something's inside the mesh, and whispered. Not a virus in our sense. A remedial script that fixes us by aligning all the phase clocks. It'll make pharaohs ring like a bell. They'll hear the bell and shoot the belfry. Talon typed with a speed born of hunger. We had a proverb, he said without looking up. A kettle that never boils is a kettle that has been told to be perfect. Remade another rule and hated it. Sever any link that goes monotone. If a neighborhood stops having arguments, it's not a neighborhood. Cut it out before it makes us beautiful. One by one bright lines went dark. Coverage maps looked like teeth knocked out of a smile. Pharaohs flickered. The dreadnought's main array swung with predatory grace. Commander, Yazzie said, we can't keep every promise. Some cities will be as naked as the day they were built. Ree felt the weight of the oath she had crafted. No sky shredders, no falling cities, and knew the next minutes would test it to breaking. Then we moved the cities, she said, because the stubborn answer was her only answer. Mateo, declare a moving shelter. Every train, every bus get under cover where the physics is generous. We'll make our own Dunkirk on rails. Copy, Alvarez said, the word a benediction. Pharaohs dimmed as though the sun had blinked. The dreadnought's charging needles reached the place on the graph where even spoke in monosyllables. And in the near side shadow, where the mesh had gone deliberately shabby, something small and bright lit its engines and came for them, fast and alone. Talon swore in a language that sounded like flutes breaking. That's a hunter-fixer. They send one when they smell improvisation. Who's on its path? Ree asked. Me, Talon said, quiet, and his hands left the console like a man taking off borrowed gloves. And before anyone could argue, he was out the door, running for a shuttle that wore Earth paint over Imperial bones. The shuttle had been a gift and an apology. Talon had brought it when he'd defected, half its systems locked by Empire pride, half replaced with human cables and hand-lettered warnings. He climbed into the couch like a man stepping onto an old bridge, whispering the startup poem only Veskai children knew. The canopy sealed. Vents sighed. Colorado fell away into a black that smelled like stars and coolant. Don't you dare, Yazzie said into his ear, the oasis humor gone dry. I haven't taught you Pinocchio yet. I will need a deck, Talon said, and the humor made the fear shrink to size. Lantern Actual permission to intercept the Hunter Fixer. Granted, Ree said, because leadership is a machine that buys time with the coins of your friends and you pray there's change someday. She watched telemetry cascade, and code through ladders between numbers. Alvarez redirected tugs with the faith of a ferry captain threading fog. On Earth, the moving shelter rolled. Subways opened their doors without fare. High-speed rail bowed into tunnels. Church basements stacked cots into geometry. This is what civil defense looks like when it loves its civilians. The Hunter Fixer didn't radiate much. It was a needle in a windless sky. Its job was to find places where improvisation made noise and subtract them. Pharaohs made beautiful noise. Lantern made arguing noise. Talon's shuttle made the noise of a memory sharpened into a blade. Whipple fogged now, and said, on the far side, canisters split, vomiting glitter into vacuum. Not shrapnel, never shrapnel, Ree's rule, but aerogel beads and ice dust, a comet's sigh turned into armor. Beams that might have carved cities instead smeared into aurora silk miles high. The physics lecture would come later, and kids would learn how sandwiching layers saves lives, how a thing designed for meteor paint could swallow war. The dreadnought adjusted. It learned as fast as any good enemy. Aim where the fog isn't, pulse short to dodge the gel's heat soak. Watch for the one voice in the choir that keeps perfect time. Their core lance began to spin up, a spindle of exotic numbers that meant someone wanted to draw a straight line through an ocean, and swallowed. If they fire that at the Pacific Shelf, we flood villages with our defense, refinished, sick with the arithmetic. Proportionality isn't a word you say and go home. It's a migraine with a badge. Talon streaked past a lantern node so close the local operator, Yuta, felt the ghost of a wake. Yazzie and Talon had loaded the shuttle with a vocabulary of interference, little phrases the Hunter Fixer's captain should have recognized as nursery rhymes and therefore ignored. The Hunter didn't ignore them. It juked. It learned, too. Machines learn fast when they're told they are perfect. Coyote, Yazzie said, time to steal fire again. Fire requires tinder, Talon replied, hands steady. He rolled the shuttle, exposing human-installed radiator petals like white lilies. He bled heat hard, a flare that said target, not in Imperium math but in the universal language of hot things in cold places. Don't you, restarted and stopped, because she wasn't his admiral and he wasn't her soldier, except that he was and she was. The Hunter bit. It cut towards Talon, ignoring the vulnerable node behind him. In that heartbeat, Yuta and two teenagers from Manila who had been building mesh nodes out of kitchen timers and Goodwill spun node 1230 degrees, just enough to break the fix and just enough to keep it from breaking too. A neighborhood with arguments. Talon's shuttle met the Hunter on a plane of stubbornness. He didn't ram. He grazed. He left a smear of gel and a woven patch of Veskai ceramic on the Hunter's skin, the way a carpenter leaves a pencil line. Here, cut. The Hunter's guidance corrected by a hair. The hair led to a sleeved corridor of blue charter curtains and into a box of gravity that pharaohs could push on. A human Veskai poem sung in torque and temperature. Got him, Yazzie whispered, and then louder because rituals matter, we got him. The Hunter Fixer sank into a gentle trap and fell asleep like a child in a car after a long day. Bring him in, reordered, already writing the file names for a future trial. Evidence, chain of custody, the crowded justice of war when you try not to lie to yourself afterward. On her other screen, the Dreadnought's core lance readout crept like a second hand. Alvarez painted with tugs, dragging mirrors into an ugly bouquet. Yuta coughed and re-knew the sound, a man hiding a hurt so others won't slow down. Say it, she told him. Node 12 took a nick, he said. My kids are fine. We're fine. He wasn't lying. He was choosing how to arrange the truth so it made everyone stronger. Leaders do that. Reflections come uninvited in war, the way smoke finds your clothes. Rethought of stoic lines scribbled in margins, of Midway's faked thirst, of the Dunkirk armada of little boats, of the code talkers who made words into armor, of civil rights marchers who turned shoe leather into force. Ethics and engineering had the same verb, build. Alarms cut the reflection. The dreadnought's charge peaked, and's graphs sang in sharp keys. If they fire, we can't catch everything, she said, and nobody argued because courage isn't pretending. Then we move the mirror, Ree said. All of it. Commander, Alvarez said, half awed, half horrified, you're calling for the Perihelion swing. She was. Pharaohs had a risky, ridiculous mode, catch sunlight not to blind but to pull, to nudge the entire lily pad lattice into a new focus in minutes instead of days. It would ask the little boats for burns they weren't built to give and the crews for faith they shouldn't have to spend. Re-toggled open band. Blue charter, she said, and her voice carried to boats with chipped paint and to kitchens with radios next to soup pots. I need every tug, barge, skiff, surveyor, and honest thief of orbit to take a line and pull. From Lagos to Long Beach, from Da Nang to Dunkirk's grandchildren, little boats lit their strobes and pushed. The sky over Earth thickened into geometry. Lantern actual, and said softly, as the line on the dreadnought's panel tipped from potential to action, we've made their straight line crooked. Hold it, Ree said, and the world held with her. The core lance fired, and the beam met a moving mirror the size of a continent. It did not miss. It bent, right toward the one place Ree could not afford to send it. There's a reason humans fear straight lines. Lightning, lances, ledgers with no room for mercy. The core lance struck Pharaohs at a shallow kiss and slid, and the slide pointed toward the one thing the blue charter hadn't armored yet, the Pacific intertie, a web of power and cables that stitched continents and fed hospitals and midnight trains and NICU full of half-pound fighters. Options, Ree said, not because she didn't know them, but because saying the word turns panic into inventory. Alvarez inhaled. We throw ice. They had a ship for that. Every sensible orbital yard has an ice barge somewhere, a slow cold mule that keeps workers watered and radiators happy. Ours was the Mahina, flagged to a co-op with a ledger on paper, and a captain who wore her grandmother's wedding ring on a chain. Captain Keola Manoa didn't wait for orders. She saw the line and lit the mains. Mahina to lantern actual, she said, voice wind-sanded. I can make the line dirty. Dirty lines break pretty math. Mahina dumped her tanks in a blossom that would have looked romantic if romance were an industrial verb. Ice flashed to plasma as the lance smeared through it, and the smear ate energy the way a sponge eats a spill. Pharaohs flexed. Mirrors screamed. The beam's heart kept going, thinner now but still cruel. Onshore, the moving shelter moved. Train conductors announced detours like lullabies. Bus drivers called strangers by sweetie and sir. Teenagers slung fiber through storm drains. A museum in San Diego rolled a tank exhibit onto the floor and let children sleep under it because sometimes safety is a story wardrobe tells. Midway trick. Yazzie offered, desperate and inspired. We make them believe the intertie's already dead. Not enough time, and said, then corrected herself the way good scientists do. Unless we cheat. Re-blinked. Define cheat. Temporal prediction, not time travel, and said quickly, because the world was listening and superstition is the wrong tool in a crisis. We pre-render the telemetry the dreadnought will expect to see if the intertie is cut and push it into their sightline ahead of reality by, she checked numbers, 2 seconds. It's a lie, Ree said, and tasted the moral metal. Lies corrode, but feints are old as boxing. Do it, but tag it. Make sure we know what we pretended. They did it. The dreadnought flinched for a machine value of flinch. Its beam faltered a measurable nothing that meant miles of cable lived. Mahina rolled, slamming her hull between lance and mirror again like a goalie who knows the shot will bruise. The blue charter shouted her name across bands until it didn't sound like a ship but like a pillar. Keola Manoa laughed, not because it was funny but because joy is a grip you can hang on. Heat, Keola, Alvarez warned, back out. After my grandmother would, she answered, and the ring on her chain burned her collarbone with love and physics. She kicked free at the last second, hull scorched, tanks empty, alive by a margin the thickness of a promise. The beam thinned again, and the line on its panel dipped under the horizontal that meant catastrophe. Pharaohs shuddered and held. In the moon's shadow, the captured hunter-fixer slept in a gravity cradle. On the dreadnought, somewhere a captain recalculated his faith in straight lines. Status, Ree asked, and the bunker became a choir. Yazzie, Mesh arguing beautifully. Alvarez, little boat still little, still brave. And Pharaoh's pedals at 60% but sufficient. Talon silence. Talon re-asked too fast. His voice came thinner, smiling. I am counting cards, Sergeant. I like this game. Bring him home, Ree said. Bring them all home. Home was a countable noun in war, and she spent it carefully. Rescue tugs fetched Mahina into a friendly orbit. Yuta sent a photo. 2 teenagers with foil blankets, grinning like they'd stolen fire fair and square. Ree let herself breathe and only then looked at the dreadnought's new posture. It had learned. It had tucked its core lance away like a cat retracting claws and spread its smaller systems into a porcupine of malice. They're dumping density, and said, launching skirmishers, not spears, spindles, slower, smarter. Good, Ree said, and everyone stared. Good means they're down to tactics we can beat without tearing the sky. We out-organize, we out-neighbor. She opened the world band again. Blue Charter Phase 3. If you can tow, tow. If you can cook, cook. If you can fix a bicycle, every bike is now a message courier. Operation Little Boats goes to Little Wheels. History is a mirror you tilt. Dunkirk had been boats, Selma had been feet. Midway had been code, today would be code and casseroles and bikes. A volunteer in Nairobi mapped safe underpasses. A retired electrician in Marseille rewired a shelter in the dark. A girl in Hue added Vietnamese captions to the moving shelter app because her grandmother preferred to read. The beam never reached the intertie, not by luck, by logistics. Lantern actual. Yazzie said, voice small now that the shouting part was done. We caught something in the hunter-fixer's memory. A call sign, a handoff. Say it, Ree said. Second wave, Yazzie said. Coordinates beyond Neptune, time to our fatigue. They expected us to survive this and still lose. Ree looked at the map where Earth sat like a marble in a blue-white sling. Somewhere beyond the cold giants, a straight line was being drawn with someone else's ruler. On another screen, a different line flickered. Distress calls from rebel enclaves in the Empire. People like Talon who had once believed Earth was livestock, and now believed Earth might be a neighbor. Can't be in two places, Alvarez said softly, the way a man says he loves you and also the storm is real. Ree nodded. Then we won't be. We'll be in 100, Blue Charter, draft the pact. Lantern goes from shield to signal. We'll push a message through the whole sky. She looked at Yazzie at the empty chair where Talon's gloves lay palmed and felt the next choice form like frost. Ethics stays on, she said, for the record and for herself. We go meet the second wave, and we invite every free hand left in the Empire to come stand with us. Anne's eyes shone like somebody had opened a window. You're proposing a coalition in the middle of a war. I'm proposing we stop calling it our war, Ree said. On the horizon of the screens, dots became possibilities. Pharaohs turned its petals toward the outer dark. The little boats checked their fuel and their courage. The world's bicycles got air in their tires, and Lantern sent the first invitation. The invitation went out on every band Lantern could braid. RF, laser tight beam skimming cloud tops, encoded neutrino tick through the mantle, and the oldest carrier of all, people repeating a simple promise in many tongues. Not a surrender, a pact. This is the Blue Charter of Earth, reread, eyes level to a camera wired to 500,000 kitchen tables. We will fight with constraints, no sky shredders, no citafall. We'll protect non-combatants, ours and yours. We share methods, not monopolies. If you will not slaughter civilians, you may stand with us. Yazzie and Talon stitched the message like quilt makers. A Navajo stanza about naming a place so you can care for it. A Veskai harvest vow, hands empty when you walk away from the field. The packet held recipes. How to argue your mesh so it can't be tuned to a single note. How to build a Whipple curtain from trash and snow. How to teach a tug to pull a continent-sized mirror with a kindness that keeps crews alive. It did not hold blueprints for weapons. Ree had made that line hard. If history teaches anything, Athens' hubris, the cold calculus of nuclear doctrines, it's that tools leak. Ethics has to travel with them. Replies sparkled from the dark like dew on razor wire. A Koran monk scientist sent a bow and a list of monasteries with solar observatories they could lend. A human union of long-haul asteroid pickers offered propellant and 1,000 work songs to keep rhythm. In a whispery channel, an imperial quartermaster requested asylum for those of us who learned to cook before we learned to kill. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so near to sorrow. Beyond Neptune, the second wave brightened. Carriers with comet coats and tenders that threw off decoys like dandelion fluff. They were not the blunt instrument of the first dreadnought. They were patient. They set up refuelers on Trojans and combed the dark for our mirrors with hands that had been burned once and didn't intend to be burned again. Lantern seeds are away, and reported. On the backs of forgotten rocks, shoebox-sized boxes woke to cislunar protocols and began to argue wonderfully with one another. A seed network wouldn't stop a wall of carriers, but it could make their scouts waste a day and a field commander waste faith. Mahina can limp, Keola Manoa said, standing on her bridge with her chain tucked into her collar. We'll tow a pallet to the blue edge and ice the lane. Ree wanted to ground her, to hand out medals and warm blankets and a stern talk. Instead, she copied the Dunkirk lesson into a new ledger. You don't name heroes until after they are safe. Before that, they are simply workers doing shifts. You have escort, she said. Little boats, full hearts, don't be pretty, be hard to analyze. The Khepri of 9 suns drifted like a cathedral missing pews. Boarding magnets dotted her flanks. Human medics worked triage by flashlight. The bridge, silent. When Yazzie finally pried open a maintenance band, a voice spoke in formal Empire diction. "We will scuttle to deny you salvage." They could do it by snapping a field in the wrong place, an EM lash that would ring pharaohs and fry the lantern clockwork into a deadly, tidy unison. Every satellite a struck bell. Cities would go dark, and in the dark people die of ordinary things. "Boarding," Ree said. "Now." Alvarez nodded, hat brim shadowing his eyes. "Imani's team is closest." Commander Imani Cade ran training for the Blue Charter Eva Corps. She was an engineer who loved safety briefings and people who did their checklists aloud. She took a dozen in patched suits, a nun-astronomer from Manila, a Koran monk, a Florida linesman who could coil a cable so it never kinked. They pushed off a tug into the cathedral's shadow. "Rules of engagement," Ree said, voice in their ears. "No fire that makes fragments. Identify, isolate, persuade. If you can cut a wire, cut the wire. If you can cut an illusion, cut the illusion first." They met the Scuttle team in a passage glittering with frost. Young, in Empire gray, a technician whose hands shook when he reached for an irreversible lever. Talon spoke in the ritual tone of a dockside foreman. "Brother, I bring a safer job." His words braided Veskai honor and human union talk. "Work with dignity. No one dies today." The lever did not move. Imani's crew spread a loop of gel across a panel like a baker icing a cake, absorbing heat from the field hardeners until they shivered into harmlessness. A monk placed a wooden bead, absurd, holy, on a vibrating girder. The vibration changed. The lash's resonance fell half an octave, and then, as entuned pharaohs to argue, the lash died. Re-exhaled. The dreadnought did not scuttle. The mesh did not ring. "Lantern actual," Yazzie said, thinner than before. "We barely made that, and there's more." On his auxiliary screen, a diagram unfolded from the Hunter-Fixer's memory. Not just carriers at Neptune, but purge barges, ships meant to sweep refugee lanes, to kill in the spaces between battles so no one would write songs. The coalition responses chimed, brave and insufficient, like a handful of bells tossed into a storm. "We can't be everywhere," Alvarez said. "No," Ree said, "but everywhere can be here." She tapped the console and opened the new channel again. "Blue Charter, Phase 4. If you have a beacon, you are Lantern. If you have a hand, you are Coalition. Purge barges will target the lanes. We make the lanes fight back." On the edge of the map, Neptune's blue eye opened. Something old and deliberate stirred in its magnetosphere. And in whispered, "They brought a quiet sun." A quiet sun is a falsity with teeth. An engine that makes a pocket of space behave like a star going to sleep, cooling plasma tongues and flattening magnetospheres into a brittle hush. In that hush, mirrors don't bite, radios don't argue, and ships that rely on voice and improvisation forget their own names. It's meant to make citizens hold their breath until the tyrant says they may breathe again. They'll deploy it between Neptune and the Trojans. And said, fingers flicking through harmonic maps. "We go quiet there, our lantern seeds stop bickering, and their purgers walk the lanes like hall monitors with knives." Ree looked at the Kepri schematic. "Can we talk through it?" "Not with one voice," Yazzie said, "but with many badly tuned ones, maybe." He grinned like a road sign pointing to an unpaved route. "I'll need choirs, amateur ones." Amateur choirs Earth had. Churches that had learned to stream during pandemics, school music rooms, barbershop quartets that looked like retired electricians and sang like redwood groves in the wind. They tuned to almost the right notes and then a little off, each on purpose in their own way. Navajo radio hosts told riddles. K-pop stands spammed and modulated, weaponizing fandom into phase noise. The quiet sun hates people acting like a neighborhood. Imani's boarders moved through Kepri's corridors, laying down safety like cat's cradle. They found prisoners, not human, not Veskai, a dozen species in the square-meter rationing of an empire, blinking at medkits and water pouches like they were miracles. War makes you efficient with awe. The tech who had tried to pull the lever sat down hard and cried without sound, tears crystallizing at his chin. Admiral on deck, someone rasped, and everyone turned to see the Kepri's commander, pinched, dignified, carrying the weight of an oath to a line of straight lines. "Your ethics," he said to Ree's camera, "will make you slow." "They'll make us precise," she said. "Slower sometimes, better always." He laughed without humor. "Your enemies learned from your first battle. They will not give you time for speeches." "Then I'll make them shorter," Ree said, "and I'll make more people give them." Mahina's patched hull shivered as Keola took her outward, towing a pallet of ice tanks and two monks who knew the breath of frozen hydrogen like a psalm. Little boats lit strobes, blue, yellow, curving toward the dark where the purge barges would try to make slaughter a bureaucratic formality. "Imani," Alvarez said, "we've got a clean line of sight to Kepri's main dish. Can you make her talk to Neptune?" "Talk or sing?" Imani asked. "Sing," Yazzie said. They retuned the imperial dish with a wrench and a prayer, bending feed horns into a choir loft. When it opened, it did not shout a weaponized equation. It played a Veskai lullaby layered over human protest chants and the low belling of ship horns from 1,000 harbors. Sound in vacuum is metaphor, but metaphors move ships. Rebel tenders answered. A Corin sloop sent a tone that meant we bring bread. An imperial frigate sent nothing and then, after a long minute in which a man decided who he was, sent coordinates for a purge barge and a curt apology. At Neptune, the quiet sun unfolded like a paper flower dipped in oil. The magnetosphere dimmed. Lantern seeds stumbled, then remembered they were supposed to argue and argued anyway because grade school choirs in Chicago and Lagos and Da Nang went gloriously off-key on command. The hush wasn't silent anymore. Purgers dropping traps and said, "If we push civilian convoys through now, we bleed." Reset her jaw. Civil rights organizers had taught the world a logistics of dignity. Carpools when buses became battlegrounds, kitchen tables to feed marches, maps drawn by people who knew which alleys were safe. "We don't send convoys blind," she said. "We send them under escort of ugly signals, and we send detours like lifelines. If anyone gets hit, we treat, fast and in public. No one dies uncounted." Imani's team reached the Kepri's calm vault, the place where straight lines became policy. There were no defenders left with energy to fight. There was a wall of names, a duty roster etched in alloy. She touched it with her gloved fingers and thought of the way memorials look before the war is over. "Talon," Yazzie said, "I need your shuttle at Lagrange Neptune Trojan 5. I have a mouth there. I need a tongue." "I am yours," Talon said quietly, and Ree winced at the grammar and let it pass because love is a grammar mistake we allow. The shuffle of decisions made a pattern. Mahina to ice the line, little boats to carry lamp seeds into the hush, choirs to keep the argument alive, Imani to put a kingdom's dish at the service of a choir, Talon to thread the hardest needle, and brought up a time slice. The purge barges in an arc, the carriers behind them with comet coats and patience, the quiet sun flattening and failing like a thunderhead that can't decide whether to ruin a picnic or drift elsewhere. "On my mark," Ree said, and the coalition breathed with her. Now, Mahina opened her tanks. Blue-white snow blossomed into the path of a barge whose captain believed he did not have to account for friction. He did. The barge hit slow water in fast space. Lantern seeds lit like fireflies arguing at a pond's edge. The choirs sang wrong with all their hearts. Neptune's magnetosphere rolled like a sleeping giant shrugging off a net. "We have lanes," Alvarez said, voice reverent. "We can get them through." They did, convoy by convoy, under blankets of noise and aurora and courage. Kids in hue translated route updates before their tea grew cold. A church in Detroit handed a trombone player a headset and a responsibility. In the Khepri's infirmary, a Veskai child blinked at a human nurse and decided to live. On the carrier line, a shape reoriented its dish. Numbers crawled that meant if this hits, it erases a neighborhood of space. It was not a quiet sun. It was something meaner, a cutting of coordinate systems so that maps lie and people fall between the pages. Straight line again and breathed. "Break the ruler," Ree said. Mahina didn't have much left to break with. Keola's laugh came again, wind-sanded. "I have one more ugly miracle." Her ice palette had a core. An old reactor slug meant to keep water friendly. She jettisoned it the wrong way, sideways into a curve where Neptune's field could grab it, where the shear would find its own edge and trip. A smart, small human trick. It could cook her. It didn't. The shear missed the lane, tore a ribbon of nothing through nothing, and limped. "Status?" Ree asked when she could hear. "Alive," Keola said, oddly sound, "and thirsty." "Drinks on me," Alvarez said, and the Blue Charter Channel applauded. Every applause costs time. While they clapped, an Empire failsafe woke inside Pharaoh's. A remedial script pulled from the Khepri's memory when the scuttle failed. The petals began to align, monotone, blooming like mold. "Commander," and said, throat tight, "our mirror is about to become beautiful." And Earth learned again that tidy can be lethal. Beauty is for music and buildings you intend to walk into. It is not for mesh. Pharaoh's sliding toward a perfect chord meant the dreadnought's ghost had found our beat and clapped on 1 and 3. In the bunker, the lights seemed to steady, terrifying in their steadiness. Ree remembered her own rule. If a neighborhood stops arguing, cut it out before it makes you beautiful. "Kill synchronization where you see it," she ordered, "even if it makes us ugly." Anne's code went through the petals like a generous vandal, scuffing phase locks, sprinkling randomness, injecting jitter stolen from waterfall noise and babies' cries, picked up by a band the specs said couldn't exist. Yazzie opened old radios and banged their sides for luck and entropy. Choir directors told altos to drift a little more. Around the world, people miscounted on purpose and saved the day. The remedial script fought back with machine faith, trying to clean. Talon sat in his shuttle at Neptune Trojan 5, hands light on the stick, speaking the poem of his childhood mixed with instructions from an Earth he loved on purpose, not by accident. "This kettle will not boil," he told the machine. "It will simmer with friends." The carriers adjusted their arcs. You could feel the decision, a change from conquest to punishment. Purge barges veered for a rebel lane whose escort was all song and not enough steel. "We won't make it," Alvarez murmured, the way a captain murmurs to his log so the ocean doesn't feel shamed. "We will," Keola snapped. Mahina had no tanks left. She had a hull and a will. Vector me. She was not fast. She was inevitable. Tugs bracketed her like kids blocking for the slowest runner and made a path. Neptune's field did the rest, a blue palm that pulled her just enough. She slid between barge and convoy and took a cut meant for a dozen small ships. The cut burned a groove down her spine. Her chain seared a kiss into her skin. She did not break. Captain Manoa re-said, and she did not add the rest because adults do not promise children that bad things never happen. I know, Keola said. I'll be home for supper or not, either way someone will eat. History folded in. Rethought of Selma and foot blisters that fed a nation's conscience, of the Great Migration's timetables, of the Berlin airlift's lesson that cargo is politics. Logistics beats cruelty if you let it be sacred. She said so out loud for the teenagers wiring a women's shelter in Hue. You're doing sacred work. On the carrier line, a flag changed color. The frigate that had apologized before now opened a bay. A shuttle like Talon slid toward the promenade of a purge barge, not a boarding action, a meeting. Lantern's message had not just made allies, it had made malcontents brave. Patch them, Ree said. A face filled a quadrant of the screen. Imperial officer, tired past pretense. Your ethics will win you friends you don't know how to keep, he said. So keep them by keeping your ethics when we fail you. You just described a marriage, Yazzie muttered, and the bridge laughed for a second that was worth a year. At Neptune, the quiet sun finally collapsed under the weight of 1,000 small wrong notes. Lantern seeds argued themselves hoarse and then found new voices. The purge barges, faced with convoys that moved like schools of fish through a coral reef of noise and kindness, took potshots and missed the soul of the thing. On Earth, Yuta sent a picture of Node 12's crew, bandaged, scuffed, alive, standing in front of a new, uglier node built out of shipping pallets and faith. We're back, he radioed. We will never be pretty again. Good, Ree said. Stay loud. Then the carriers did what disciplined armies do when a plan fails. They consolidated and chose a single hard problem. They dropped the remains of their comet coats and lit what their doctrine called a hammer, a beam broad as a river, slow as shame, bright as a new legislature. It didn't need a quiet sun or a shear. It needed only to keep pressure until the other side buckled. That will cook anything we put in front of it, and said, mirrors will ripple, gel will boil. We can't bend it far enough, not without breaking your rules. Ree's screen filled with names. Schools, kitchens, tugs, choirs, monks, defectors, a nurse with a Veskai child asleep in her lap. Constraints are not a leash but a backbone. Then we don't stand in front of it, she said. We stand aside and pull. Pharaohs entered Perihelion swing two uglier, harsher than the first. Little boats took lines until their decks smoked. Choirs leaned into the wrong notes until their throats hurt. The hammer licked a path that curved under Neptune's magnetopause, met a seed swarm that glittered like plankton and slid, an inch too enough. Now, Ree said, and Talon pushed. His shuttle wore earth paint over imperial bones and a net of tractor filaments like spider silk. He caught the edge of the beam with something that wasn't a catch and wasn't a push. It was a nudge that turned a straight line into a sentence with a clause. The beam kissed an empty wedge of space, wasted itself in brightness, and died. The carriers paused. In that pause, a message arrived, not from them, not from any code they owned. A coalition ping, authenticated by a dozen species who'd never agreed on anything before breakfast. Parley, Yazzie Reed, startled, requested at Sol Lagrange 1. They want terms. Terms for what? Alvarez asked, suspicious as a fisherman who's been offered free ice. An armistice, and said, breathless, or a trap. Ree looked at the map that had cities on it and names and kids and boats. She looked at the quiet Kepri, at Mahina's smoking spine, at Talon's shaking hands on the stick. You don't do peace because you trust the other side. You do it because you trust your side not to waste it. Lantern will meet them, she said. We bring our ethics to the table. We bring our friends. And as the carriers dimmed their weapons, a third ping arrived from deeper space, older, stranger. A voice that said simply, "We have watched your argument. May we join?" The table at Salel 1 was a plane of light projected between habitats that smelled like glue and oranges. Ree floated opposite an Imperial envoy who wore exhaustion like a medal. Around them clustered boxes with faces. Keola, cheeks salt-burned. Alvarez, hat off as if in church, and with a tablet full of curves. Yazzie with a grin he loaned to rooms in trouble. Talon, hands folded, not hiding the tremor. A Koran monk drifted near a Veskai dock boss. The Blue Charter had no foreign service. It had a family reunion. We propose a cessation of hostilities while we evacuate our purge assets, the envoy said. The sentence was a test, not a gift. Our condition, Ree answered, is that evacuate means stand down and surrender those assets into coalition custody for dismantling in public with your people watching. We want your citizens to see you choose. The envoy flinched. You ask a sovereign to be worthy of being followed. Talon finished, soft. We who left are asking you for a favor we did not earn. They argued law like carpenters choosing a joint. Just war theory peered around the edges. Discrimination, proportionality, last resort. Ree kept her speeches short and her rules long. No sky shredders, no citafall, protection of non-combatants, medical corridors. A promise to teach logistics as a civic art, not a weapon. Terms written in plain language so a nun could read them aloud and a child could ask questions. While they argued, the third voice came again, clearer. It was not a single species. It was a choir of watchers from the dark between arms, old enough to be patient. They had refused war for so long their language had gone soft around edges where orders used to be. We saw your wrong notes defeat a quiet sun, their translator said, fascination wrapped in humility. We would learn to argue, and laughed, sudden and loud, a splash in still water. We can teach you to be noisy, but we'll ask something back. What? The choir asked. Help us keep our rules when it gets hard. Because that is the trick. Midway's cleverness can curdle into hubris if you win too clean. Dunkirk's boats can become legend and devour the fact that they were desperation. The code talkers can be invoked by people who won't listen to living Navajo. Civics turns into slogans if you don't keep cooking. On Neptune's edge, convoys threaded home under auroras that would make poets weep and engineers nod. On Earth, the moving shelter wound down without losing anyone to a fall of debris because Ree had kept the sky sacred. Yuda's kids cut a ribbon on a new node, uglier than the old, better because it had more arguments built in. Choirs went back to singing on purpose, not to save the world, but because singing knits us up after we've been unspooled. The armistice inked itself into vacuum in light lines and handshake pings. Purge barges powered down under rebel supervision. Their captains walked down their own gangways and handed over keys. And some cried like the technician had cried, because the shape of their days was changing, and that is a death and a birth. The carriers backed away. Their comet coats evaporated into steam in sunlight, and that, too, looked like absolution. Kepri stayed where she was. We would not turn her into a trophy. We would turn her into a school. Imani carved a plaque with a multi-tool, a cathedral broken to make a clinic. Kids in bustin' classes would touch panels and ask questions and learn that beauty is complicated and useful is holy. Keola walked onto Mahina's deck with a limp and a grin. Alvarez saluted her with a cup of coffee that had been brewing since the age of sails and bad weather. Yazzie found a guitar. Talon stepped to a window and watched the blue-white swath of earth turn and turned his hands palm up, a Veskai sign of thanks to the ground. Rewrote a last memo before sleep, a thing for the archive and for the next commander who would open it at 3 in the morning and need to feel less alone. She wrote that ethics makes you slower and smarter and more dangerous to tyrants. She wrote that the Blue Charter starts with a casserole and ends with a starship, and you need both. She wrote that the world is saved not by one mirror but by 1,000 little boats, little wheels, little arguments, none of them pretty, all of them true. Then she went to the window, too, and let herself think about philosophy without making it a speech. Marcus had written about impediments becoming the way. Selma had put feet where no vehicle could go. Midway had turned on a feint and an honest admission of thirst. History wasn't a myth. It was a manual written by people who had been tired and afraid and ethical on purpose. Lantern actual and said from the doorway, voice with a smile in it, "We've got a ping from the dark. The choir of watchers has sent us a hymn. It's a terrible." "Good," Ree said, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "We'll teach them to sing worse." Outside, Pharaoh's petals glittered, not aligned, never aligned, arguing like a blessed neighborhood. The lanes to Neptune shimmered with seed lights. The map grew new routes not called trade yet, not called patrol, just called possible. The coalition's charter fit on one page and 1,000 hearts. The empire would not fall in a day. Nothing good or bad does. But the balance had shifted in the way that mattered. Away from straight lines and toward sentences with clauses, toward choices you say out loud, toward rules that feel like promises and not like chains. Talon rested his hands finally still. "What do humans call this feeling?" he asked. "Neighbor," Yazzie said from behind his guitar. "We call it being neighbors." Ree looked at a star the color of spilled milk and the dark around it that would need arguing soon. "Lights on," she said. "Little boats ready." And Lantern, stubborn and bright and imperfect on purpose, aimed its invitations outward. Because somewhere a map still had a straight line on it, and somebody human would be there to make it curve.